Nothing prepares you for the moment your own child treats you like an embarrassment instead of a mother. I found out my son got married from a woman I barely knew on Facebook. I still remember the exact moment because I was standing in my kitchen making chicken soup while an old jazz station played softly from the radio near the window. It was raining outside, one of those slow gray Tuesday afternoons where the whole world feels tired. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I smiled when I saw a notification pop up with my son Daniel's name tagged in a wedding photo. At first, I thought it had to be an engagement announcement. Daniel had been dating Melissa for almost 3 years, and even though she had never exactly been warm toward me, I honestly believed that when the wedding finally happened, things would improve. I thought marriage might mature them both. I thought family would eventually matter to them the same way it mattered to me. But when I opened the photo, my stomach dropped so fast I actually had to sit down. There was Daniel in a dark blue tuxedo, smiling ear to ear while Melissa stood beside him in a white dress holding flowers. Behind them was a beautiful vineyard decorated with lights and white roses. The caption read, "Yesterday was perfect. Married my best friend surrounded by the people we love most. Surrounded by the people we love most." I stared at that sentence for at least 30 seconds. My hands went cold. There were over 100 photos posted already. Pictures of Melissa dancing with her bridesmaids. Pictures of Daniel laughing with his college friends. Pictures of her parents crying during the ceremony. Even Daniel's coworkers were there. I recognized neighbors. Cousins. People from church. But not me. There wasn't a single photo with his mother because his mother had never been invited. At first, I honestly convinced myself there had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe they had planned something small first and would have another ceremony later. Maybe they had tried to call me. Maybe my phone had failed to ring. I grabbed my glasses with shaking hands and checked my messages again. Nothing. No missed calls. No invitation. No explanation. Just wedding photos flooding social media while I sat alone in my kitchen wearing an old cardigan with soup boiling behind me like any other ordinary day. I called Daniel immediately. Straight to voicemail. I called again. No answer. Then I called Melissa because suddenly I could not breathe without hearing someone explain what was happening. She answered on the third ring, and I still remember how annoyed her voice sounded, as if I were interrupting something important. "Hello," she said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Melissa, sweetheart. I just saw pictures online. Did you and Daniel get married?" There was a pause, but not a guilty pause. More like an irritated one. Then she laughed softly. Actually laughed. "Oh. Yeah. Yesterday. Yesterday." Just like that. As casually as someone mentioning they stopped for coffee. I swallowed hard and asked the question that shattered whatever dignity I had left. "Why didn't Daniel tell me?" Another pause. Then came the sentence I do not think I will ever forget for the rest of my life. "We wanted it to be small. Just for special people." My heart literally hurt. Physically hurt. I gripped the edge of the counter because I thought my knees might give out. I could hear music and voices in the background behind her, like they were still celebrating while I stood there humiliated in my own kitchen. I whispered, "I'm his mother." And do you know what she said? Well. Daniel agreed this would be easier. Easier. Easier not to invite the woman who raised him alone after his father walked out when he was 8 years old. Easier not to invite the woman who worked double shifts at a grocery store so he could go to summer basketball camp. Easier not to invite the woman who still sent money every month to help them pay rent because things were tight. My chest tightened so badly I had to sit down again. "Can I at least speak to Daniel?" I asked quietly. I heard muffled voices. Then my son came on the line sounding uncomfortable, almost impatient. "Mom," he sighed. "Not Mom, I'm sorry." "Not Mom, please let me explain." Just exhaustion, like I was the problem. "Daniel," I said, trying not to cry, why didn't you tell me you were getting married?" He went silent for a moment before saying, "Melissa thought keeping it intimate would avoid drama." Drama. I nearly laughed at the absurdity of it. I had spent 3 years biting my tongue around Melissa to avoid drama. When she criticized my cooking, I smiled. When she rolled her eyes at my birthday gifts, I stayed polite. When she corrected the way I folded towels in their apartment after I spent my Saturday helping them move, I said nothing. I had swallowed every insult because I loved my son more than my pride. And now somehow I was the drama. "I would have sat quietly in the back row just to see you happy," I whispered. Daniel exhaled heavily. "Mom, please don't make this into something bigger than it is." Bigger than it is. My only son getting married without telling me. My fingers trembled around the phone. Through the window above the sink, rain continued sliding slowly down the glass while my soup boiled over unnoticed onto the stove. I remember thinking how strange it was that ordinary things kept happening even while your heart was breaking. Cars still drove past outside. The radio still played soft music. Somewhere across town, my son and his new wife were probably opening champagne with people they considered important enough to attend their wedding. And somehow I was expected to accept that quietly. "I understand," I finally said, although I absolutely did not. Daniel sounded relieved immediately. "Thanks, Mom. We'll talk later, okay?" Then he hung up. Just like that. No apology. No invitation to dinner afterward. No attempt to comfort me. I sat there alone at my kitchen table for nearly an hour staring at those wedding photos while hundreds of strangers congratulated my son in the comments section. Melissa looked radiant in every picture. Daniel looked happy. Happier than I had seen him in years. But what hurt most was realizing how easy it had been for him to erase me from one of the most important days of his life. I kept replaying Melissa's words in my mind. Just for special people. And slowly, painfully, I began to understand something I had refused to admit for years. To them, I was not family anymore. I was just the woman paying part of their rent every month. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those wedding photos again. Melissa smiling under expensive white flowers while my son stood beside her pretending his mother did not exist. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to rest and walked slowly into the kitchen. The house felt painfully quiet. It had been quiet for years, ever since Daniel moved out, but that night the silence felt different. Colder somehow. I made myself a cup of tea and sat near the window where I used to wait for Daniel's school bus when he was little. Funny how a mother can spend decades loving someone so completely that every corner of her home carries memories of them, while that same child can erase her from his life in a single afternoon. I stared out at the empty street and thought about all the years that led to this moment. Daniel was 8 years old when his father left. One ordinary Saturday morning, his father packed 2 suitcases, said he needed space, and never really came back. After that, it was just me and my boy against the world. I worked wherever I could. Grocery stores. Diners. Hotel laundry rooms. For almost 10 years, I averaged 60 hours a week just to keep the lights on and food in the refrigerator. There were nights I came home so exhausted my hands shook while opening canned soup for dinner, but I still sat at the kitchen table helping Daniel with homework because I refused to let him feel abandoned. Every birthday, I made sure there was a cake even when money was tight. Every Christmas, there were presents under the tree, even if it meant I skipped paying my own dentist bill another month. When Daniel wanted basketball shoes in high school that cost almost $200, I picked up extra weekend shifts until my feet blistered inside my work shoes. I still remember him opening that box on Christmas morning with tears in his eyes because he knew we could not really afford them. Back then, he hugged me so tightly I thought my heart might burst from happiness. "I will take care of you one day, Mom," he used to say. I believed him. Maybe that was my mistake. Daniel was a good boy growing up. Quiet. Sweet. The kind of kid who apologized if he accidentally bumped into someone at the grocery store. Teachers loved him. Neighbors loved him. Even after his father disappeared, he rarely complained. I think that made me love him even harder because I knew how much pain he carried silently. When he got accepted into college, I cried in the parking lot after dropping him off because I truly believed all the sacrifices had been worth it. I refinanced my small house to help cover tuition his scholarships did not pay for. I told myself debt did not matter as long as my son had opportunities one never had. And for a while, everything seemed fine. Daniel called often during his freshman year. He told me about classes, friends, professors he admired. Then he met Melissa. At first, I tried very hard to like her. She was beautiful in a polished kind of way. Always perfectly dressed. Always speaking confidently like she belonged in every room she entered. Daniel seemed completely fascinated by her from the beginning. He talked about her constantly. Melissa is ambitious. Melissa wants to start her own business. Melissa understands me. I was happy he found someone he loved. Truly. But little things started bothering me over time. The first Thanksgiving she spent at my house, she barely touched the meal I spent 2 days preparing. She pushed sweet potatoes around her plate and asked if I had anything organic to drink besides soda. When Daniel complimented my cooking, Melissa laughed and said, "Well, comfort food is easy when butter is the main ingredient." It sounds small now, but I remember feeling embarrassed in my own dining room. Another time, when Daniel and Melissa were searching for apartments together, I offered to help them move. I spent an entire Saturday carrying boxes up 3 flights of stairs even though my back hurt for days afterward. While unpacking their kitchen, Melissa watched me fold dish towels and casually said, "Oh no, that is not how I organize things." Then she refolded every single towel after I finished. Daniel just stood there awkwardly pretending not to notice. I told myself she was simply particular. I kept making excuses because I loved my son too much to create tension in his relationship. The real turning point came about a year after they moved in together. Daniel called one evening sounding stressed. Rent had increased. Melissa's business idea was between investors. Their car payment was higher than expected. He asked if I could help temporarily until they got stable again. I did not even hesitate. I started sending them $1,500 every month. At first, Daniel thanked me repeatedly. Melissa even sent flowers once with a thank you card that looked more expensive than anything I bought for myself. But over time, gratitude slowly disappeared. The monthly transfers became expected. Normal. Like a utility bill. If I sent the money a day later than usual, Daniel texted asking if everything was okay. Yet somehow birthdays became forgotten. Mother's Day calls became shorter. Invitations stopped coming. One Christmas, I drove 40 minutes through snow to bring them homemade cookies and gifts. Melissa opened the door wearing silk pajamas and looked irritated before I even spoke. "We were about to head out," she said while glancing back toward the living room where her friends were gathered around wine glasses. Daniel hugged me quickly at the door like I was a delivery driver instead of his mother. I handed them carefully wrapped presents and stood there smiling while cold wind blew across the porch. Nobody invited me inside. I drove home crying so hard I missed my exit on the highway. Still, the next month, I transferred the rent money like always. That was the humiliating truth I finally had to face sitting alone in my kitchen after their wedding. I had spent years confusing love with obligation. Every time they pulled away emotionally, I compensated financially. Every cold conversation made me try harder. Every rejection made me give more. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being Daniel's mother and became his safety net. And maybe the worst part was realizing Melissa understood that before I did. She knew exactly how much guilt controlled me. She knew I would rather hurt silently than risk losing my son completely. Around sunrise, I opened my banking app on my phone and stared at the transfer history. Month after month. Year after year. Thousands and thousands of dollars. Rent payments. Emergency car repairs. utility bills, furniture purchases. Even part of their honeymoon deposit last summer because Daniel claimed they needed a break. I sat there in the dim kitchen light realizing I had financially supported the very wedding I was excluded from. That realization hit harder than anything else. I looked around my small house at furniture I had owned for 20 years because I always said I needed to save money. Meanwhile, Melissa posted photos online from luxury restaurants with cocktails that cost more than my hourly wage at the grocery store. For the first time in years, something inside me shifted. Not anger exactly. Something quieter. Sadder. Clearer. I finally understood that no amount of sacrifice can make people value you if they already take your love for granted. Over the next few days, I kept telling myself I needed space before speaking to Daniel again. I wanted time to calm down, time to think clearly, time to stop feeling like someone had reached into my chest and quietly removed a piece of my life without warning. But the strange thing about heartbreak is that the world rarely pauses long enough to let you process it. Life keeps moving. Bills still arrive. Grocery stores still open at 8 in the morning. People still post smiling photos online while your entire understanding of your family changes overnight. 3 days after the wedding, Melissa uploaded another set of pictures to social media. This time it was their honeymoon. Napa Valley. Expensive wine tastings. Spa robes. Sunset dinners under glowing lights. I saw comments from people calling them couple goals and the perfect match. Melissa posted a photo of herself leaning against Daniel while holding a champagne glass with the caption, "Marrying your soulmate is the greatest luxury." Luxury. That word stayed with me because less than 48 hours earlier, Daniel had texted asking if I could send the rent payment a little early that month because their checking account was tight after travel expenses. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Not once did he mention how I was feeling. Not once did he apologize for hiding his wedding from me. He simply acted as though nothing significant had happened. As though excluding his own mother from one of the biggest moments of his life was a minor misunderstanding I should already be over. I transferred the money anyway. That was the embarrassing truth. Even after everything, I still sent the money. $1,500 disappeared from my account while photos of their luxury honeymoon continued appearing online. I remember sitting at my dining table looking at my bank balance afterward and suddenly feeling exhausted in a way sleep could not fix. I had worked all week at the grocery store dealing with impatient customers, standing on aching feet for 8 hours a day, while the couple who humiliated me sipped wine overlooking California vineyards using money they claimed they did not have. A few days later, Daniel finally called. I almost did not answer, but some part of me still hoped maybe he had realized how cruel everything looked from my side. Maybe he finally understood how deeply he hurt me. "Hey, Mom," he said casually, as if we had spoken normally yesterday. "How are you?" I nearly laughed at the absurdity of the question. "I have been better," I replied quietly. There was a pause before he sighed. "Look, Melissa feels bad that things got awkward." Awkward. Not painful. Not cruel. Just awkward. "She feels bad?" I asked. "Daniel, she told me the wedding was only for special people." He immediately sounded defensive. "You are taking that too personally." Too personally. I sat there gripping the phone in disbelief. "Your wife told me I was not important enough to attend your wedding." "Mom, that is not what she meant." "Then what exactly did she mean?" Another silence. Then he changed the subject completely. "Anyway, the landlord raised parking fees again, so things are tighter than expected." There it was. Every conversation somehow found its way back to money. I closed my eyes and leaned back in my chair. "Daniel," I said slowly, "do you even hear yourself right now?" He sounded irritated now instead of guilty. "I called to check on you." "No," I answered softly. "You called because rent is due next week." The silence on the other end became sharp and uncomfortable. Finally he muttered, "I do not know why you are making everything into a transaction." That sentence hit me so hard I almost lost my breath. Making everything into a transaction. After years of financially carrying them while accepting emotional scraps in return. I wanted to scream. Instead, I whispered, "I think we both know who turned this relationship into a transaction." Daniel ended the call quickly after that. The next morning, Melissa posted another smiling photo online. This one showed Daniel carrying shopping bags outside a luxury outlet mall. The caption read, "A husband who spoils me properly." Hundreds of likes poured in within hours. I stared at the screen thinking about how Daniel once panicked over a $70 electric bill while now spending money on designer stores 2 days after requesting help with rent. But what hurt more than the hypocrisy was realizing they no longer even bothered hiding it from me. They simply assumed I would continue funding their lifestyle regardless of how they treated me. About a week later, I decided to drop off some homemade lasagna at their apartment. Part of me hates admitting that now because looking back, I can see how desperately I still wanted some sign that my son loved me. I arrived around 6 in the evening carrying the warm dish wrapped carefully in towels to keep it hot. Their apartment complex looked nicer than most places I had ever lived in myself. Clean landscaping. Private parking. Decorative lights near the entrance fountain. Ironically, I was still helping pay for the place while feeling like an unwelcome visitor every time I came there. I knocked softly. After a moment, Melissa opened the door halfway. She was wearing expensive workout clothes and talking on wireless headphones. The smell of takeout food drifted from inside the apartment. She looked surprised to see me standing there. Not happy. Just surprised. "Oh," she said flatly. "You did not text first." I forced a smile and lifted the casserole dish slightly. "I made lasagna. Daniel always loved it." Melissa glanced behind her before opening the door only another inch. "We actually already ordered dinner." Her tone made it painfully obvious she expected me to leave immediately. I tried not to sound hurt. "That is okay. You can save it for tomorrow." She hesitated before reluctantly taking the dish from my hands. "Thanks." I stood there awkwardly waiting for her to invite me inside. She never did. Through the small opening behind her, I could hear Daniel laughing in the living room while a television played loudly in the background. He had not even come to the door. Melissa shifted impatiently before saying, "We are kind of in the middle of something." I nodded slowly. "Of course." Then, right before closing the door, she casually added, "Oh, and the internet bill auto payment bounced yesterday. Daniel said he was going to ask you about it." Something inside me cracked quietly at that moment. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just a small, painful break deep inside my chest. I stood there in the hallway staring at the closed door for several seconds while voices and laughter continued inside the apartment I was helping pay for but was apparently not welcome to enter. Then I turned around and walked slowly back to my car carrying nothing except the empty casserole towels in my hands. I sat behind the steering wheel without starting the engine. Outside, young couples walked through the parking lot carrying groceries and holding hands while music played faintly from someone's balcony above. I remember looking up at the apartment windows and realizing something that terrified me because of how true it felt. If I stopped sending money tomorrow, I honestly did not know whether Daniel and Melissa would still want me in their lives at all. And for the first time since becoming a mother, I was afraid I already knew the answer. After that night in the parking lot, something inside me became very quiet. Not healed. Not peaceful. Just quiet in the way a person becomes quiet after finally understanding a painful truth they spent years trying to avoid. I stopped crying. That surprised me the most. For weeks after the wedding, I had cried constantly. In the shower before work. In my car during lunch breaks. Standing in grocery store aisles while stocking shelves. But after realizing I might only matter to Daniel when money was involved, the tears slowly disappeared. In their place came a strange kind of clarity. I began noticing things I had ignored before. Patterns. Behaviors. Small moments that suddenly looked very different once I stopped seeing them through the eyes of a mother desperate to feel loved. The next Friday, Daniel texted me around noon while I was on break at work. "Hey Mom. Quick question. Did the utility payment go through?" No greeting. No asking how I was doing. No mention of the humiliating visit outside their apartment days earlier. Just another bill. I stared at the message while sitting alone in the employee break room eating a turkey sandwich from a plastic container. Around me, younger workers laughed over videos on their phones while I looked down at my son's message feeling strangely numb. I typed back, "I will check later after work." His response came immediately. "Okay, because the company sent a warning email." Warning email. Funny how quickly emergencies appeared whenever money was involved. Yet somehow weeks could pass without him checking whether his mother felt lonely or hurt. I slipped my phone back into my purse and suddenly remembered a moment from years earlier when Daniel was 16. We had been struggling financially that winter after my car transmission failed unexpectedly. I remember apologizing because Christmas gifts would be smaller that year. Daniel hugged me and said, "I do not care about presents. I just care about you." I sat there in the break room wondering where that boy had gone. Or maybe worse, wondering whether he had only existed when he needed me most. That evening after work, I came home exhausted and opened my laptop at the kitchen table. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the old ceiling fan hummed above me. Instead of immediately paying the overdue utility bill like I normally would, I did something I had never done before. I opened my online banking records and began going through every transfer I had sent Daniel over the past 3 years. At first I simply wanted to understand the total amount. But as I scrolled month after month, a larger picture slowly began forming in front of me. Rent assistance. Car repairs. Medical copays. Furniture deposits. Internet bills. Parking fees. Grocery money. Anniversary dinners. Emergency credit card payments. There was even a $3,000 transfer labeled honeymoon help from 8 months earlier that I had completely forgotten about. By midnight, I had filled an entire legal pad with numbers. The final total made my stomach turn. I had given them more than $90,000 over 3 years. $90,000. I stared at the number for several minutes in silence. That amount could have repaired my roof, paid off my car, allowed me to retire earlier. Instead, it financed luxury apartments, weekend trips, designer shopping bags, expensive restaurants, and apparently a wedding I was not considered important enough to attend. I leaned back slowly in my chair and looked around my small kitchen. The wallpaper near the sink had started peeling years ago, but I kept delaying repairs because I needed to be careful with money. My refrigerator made strange noises sometimes. My couch cushions were worn flat from age. Meanwhile, Melissa posted photos online holding handbags worth more than my monthly grocery budget. For the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had been too afraid to face before. What exactly were Daniel and Melissa sacrificing while I sacrificed everything? The answer came immediately. Nothing. The following weekend, I attended church alone like always. Several people approached me afterward smiling politely and congratulating me on Daniel's wedding. Apparently Melissa had shared dozens of professional photographs online, and everyone assumed I had attended. I forced polite smiles while my chest tightened with embarrassment. One woman from church said, "You must be so proud. The ceremony looked beautiful." I nodded quietly because admitting the truth out loud still felt humiliating somehow. Then another woman asked, "Where are the newlyweds honeymooning?" Before I could answer, someone else cheerfully replied, "Napa Valley." Melissa posted amazing pictures. Everyone laughed warmly while I stood there feeling invisible in a conversation about my own son's marriage. On the drive home, I finally admitted something to myself that changed everything afterward. Daniel and Melissa were comfortable disrespecting me because there had never been consequences before. Every time they ignored me emotionally, I compensated financially. Every rude comment got excused. Every humiliation got swallowed quietly. I had trained them to believe my love came with unlimited access and zero boundaries. And maybe the hardest realization of all was understanding that some people will continue taking as long as you continue giving. That night, I received another text from Melissa directly. "Hey. The internet bill still shows unpaid. No hello. No apology for shutting the door in my face days earlier. Just another demand wrapped in casual entitlement." I looked at the message for a very long time before setting the phone face down on the table without responding. It was the first time I had ever ignored one of their financial requests. My heart pounded with guilt almost immediately. Mothers like me are conditioned to feel selfish for setting boundaries. Even after years of being used, some part of me still feared disappointing my child more than protecting myself. But another part of me had started waking up. A quieter part. A stronger part. Over the next few days, I stopped reacting emotionally and started observing instead. Daniel only contacted me when money was involved. Melissa never reached out unless there was a bill problem. Neither of them asked how I was coping after the wedding humiliation. Neither invited me to dinner. Neither attempted a genuine conversation. Yet their social media remained filled with expensive outings and smiling captions about building a beautiful future together. I noticed something else too. Every single part of their lifestyle depended on stability they had not actually built themselves. The apartment lease. The utility accounts. The car insurance. The emergency credit cushion. Piece by piece, I had quietly become the invisible foundation beneath their marriage. And they were so used to my support they no longer even noticed it existed. One evening, while organizing old paperwork in a filing cabinet near the hallway, I found the original apartment lease documents from when Daniel first moved in with Melissa. I almost threw them aside before something caught my eye. My own signature. Then another document underneath it. Cosigner agreement. Then another. Automatic payment authorization linked directly to my checking account. I sat down slowly on the floor surrounded by papers while a strange calm settled over me. For years, I had convinced myself I was merely helping out temporarily. But legally and financially, I had tied myself directly into supporting their entire lifestyle. Without me, the structure underneath them suddenly looked far less stable. I remember sitting there under the hallway light holding those papers and thinking something I never imagined I would think about my own son. Daniel did not fear losing his mother. He feared losing what his mother provided. And once I fully understood that difference, I finally stopped seeing myself as powerless. The next Monday morning, I woke up before sunrise and sat quietly at my kitchen table with a cup of black coffee and the stack of lease documents spread out in front of me. Outside, the neighborhood was still dark except for a few porch lights glowing through the misty early morning air. For years, my mornings began with worry. Worry about bills. Worry about Daniel. Worry about whether I was doing enough for everyone around me. But that morning felt different. Calm, somehow. Not because the pain was gone. It was still there every second. But clarity had finally replaced confusion. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself how to keep my son happy and started asking myself why I had accepted being treated like an inconvenience by people whose lives I was financially carrying. I picked up the lease agreement again and read every page carefully. Daniel and Melissa were listed as primary occupants, but because their credit scores were not strong enough when they applied, I had signed as guarantor. At the time, Daniel promised it was temporary. Just until we get stable, Mom. Those exact words echoed in my head while I stared at the paperwork. Temporary had somehow turned into 3 years. 3 years of quiet dependency disguised as adulthood. 3 years of Melissa posting luxury dinners online while I clipped grocery coupons and delayed replacing my leaking washing machine. 3 years of them building a marriage on financial support they pretended did not exist whenever it became convenient. Around 9 in the morning, my phone buzzed with another message from Daniel. "Hey Mom. Did you handle the internet bill? No mention of how I was doing. No acknowledgement of the growing silence between us. Just another unpaid expense waiting for me to solve it. I looked at the message without emotion this time. Then I set the phone down and did something I had not done in years. I left it unanswered. About an hour later, another message appeared. Mom? Then another. The payment is overdue. The strange thing was that instead of feeling guilty, I suddenly felt tired. Deeply tired. Tired of being contacted only when there was a problem. Tired of pretending generosity could buy love. Tired of being emotionally excluded while financially included in every part of their lives. That afternoon during lunch break, I called the property management company listed on the apartment lease. My hands trembled slightly while waiting on hold because even after everything, part of me still felt afraid of setting boundaries with my own child. Eventually a woman named Karen answered. She sounded cheerful and professional. I explained that I was listed as guarantor on my son's apartment lease and wanted to review the payment structure connected to my account. Karen immediately recognized my name. Oh yes, she said warmly. You have been handling the automatic backup payments. Backup payments. I almost laughed hearing it described so casually. Can you explain exactly how that works? I asked carefully. Karen informed me that whenever Daniel and Melissa's account lacked sufficient funds by the due date, the system automatically withdrew the remaining balance from my linked checking account to avoid late notices. I felt my stomach tighten. How often has that happened? There was a pause while she checked records. Quite a few times over the past year. Quite a few times. My throat suddenly felt dry. Can you tell me how many? More typing. Then Karen replied gently, 17. 17 times. 17 separate months where my son and his wife quietly failed to pay their own rent while pretending online that they lived some glamorous independent lifestyle. I thanked her politely and hung up before sitting frozen in my car staring through the windshield at nothing. I thought back to all the conversations where Daniel claimed things were mostly under control. All the times Melissa bragged online about business opportunities and expensive brunches while their rent silently drained from my account behind the scenes. They had not merely accepted help. They had built their entire adult lives assuming I would always rescue them quietly in the background. That realization changed something fundamental inside me. Not because of the money itself, although $90,000 was enough to shake anyone. No, what changed me was realizing how completely invisible my sacrifices had become to them. I was no longer a person in their lives. I was infrastructure. That evening, I came home, changed into sweatpants, and sat at the kitchen table again. This time I opened every financial account connected to Daniel and Melissa. Utility payments. Insurance policies. Automatic transfers. Subscription services. One by one, I began seeing the full extent of how deeply involved I had become in supporting their lifestyle. Some accounts still used my email address as the primary recovery contact because Daniel once said it was easier that way. Easier for whom, I wondered now. Around 7 o'clock, my phone rang. Melissa. I stared at her name lighting up the screen while my heartbeat remained strangely steady. Normally seeing her call would fill me with anxiety because I always expected criticism, tension, or another request for help. But this time I answered calmly. Hello? Melissa sounded irritated immediately. Did Daniel talk to you about the internet payment? No greeting. No small talk. No concern. Straight to the bill. He mentioned it, I replied evenly. Well, it still has not gone through, she said sharply. They are threatening to suspend service tomorrow. I looked around my small kitchen at peeling wallpaper and aging appliances while remembering her social media photos from luxury wineries less than 2 weeks earlier. That sounds stressful, I said quietly. Melissa exhaled dramatically. We just got married and there are already so many expenses. Those words almost made me smile from disbelief. We just got married. As though I had somehow shared in this joyful family milestone instead of discovering it online like a stranger. I imagine weddings are expensive, I replied. Another silence. Then Melissa said something that finally removed every remaining trace of guilt I still carried. Honestly, Daniel said you have been acting emotional lately and making things harder than they need to be. Emotional. That word again. The favorite word people use when they want to dismiss pain they caused themselves. I leaned back slowly in my chair and looked at the stack of financial documents beside me. Melissa, I asked calmly, do you know how much money I have given you two over the past 3 years? She sounded caught off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I thought silently. Everything. But instead of arguing, I simply said, I was just curious whether either of you had ever calculated it. She became defensive immediately. Daniel told me you offered to help because you wanted to. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. The perfect justification. As though kindness automatically erased accountability. As though voluntary sacrifice meant I no longer deserved respect. I did want to help, I answered quietly. But I never realized helping would eventually replace being family. The line went silent for several seconds. Then Melissa gave a cold little laugh that sent a chill through me. You are being dramatic again. Dramatic. Not hurt. Not excluded. Not humiliated. Just dramatic. I suddenly understood that no conversation would ever change these people because their entire comfort depended on minimizing my feelings. As long as I continued accepting disrespect quietly, everything in their world remained convenient. I ended the call politely after that, but once the line disconnected, I sat motionless for a long time staring at nothing. Then slowly, very calmly, I opened my banking app. One by one, I began removing automatic payment authorizations linked to Daniel and Melissa's accounts. Not angrily. Not impulsively. Quietly. Carefully. Like someone finally waking up after years of sleepwalking through their own life. When I finished, the kitchen felt strangely silent. My hands rested still on the table while rain tapped softly against the windows again. Somewhere across town, my son and his new wife probably still believed they controlled the situation completely. They believed I would always absorb consequences before those consequences ever reached them. What they did not realize yet was that for the first time in years, I had stopped protecting them from reality. The first 3 days after I removed the payment authorizations were strangely quiet. No calls. No messages from Melissa. No requests from Daniel. It almost felt peaceful. I went to work, came home, watered the small flowers near my front porch, and cooked dinner for one like I had done for years. But underneath that calm, I knew something was coming. People who build their lives around someone else's support rarely notice stability until it disappears. On the 4th morning, my phone buzzed repeatedly while I was folding laundry in the living room. Daniel. Then Melissa. Then Daniel again. I let the calls continue unanswered while calmly folding towels into neat stacks. A few minutes later, messages started arriving one after another. Mom, please call me. There is a problem with the rent payment. The landlord says the backup account was removed. Did something happen with your bank? I sat down slowly on the couch and read every message twice. Not one asked if I was okay. Not one said they missed me. Not one apologized for the wedding. Every sentence revolved around panic over money. And somehow that hurt less now than it would have weeks earlier because finally, everything was visible. There was no pretending anymore. Around noon, Melissa called again. This time I answered. Hello? Her voice sounded sharp with anxiety immediately. What is going on with the account? No greeting. No hesitation. Straight into crisis mode. I remained calm. Which account? The apartment payment account, she snapped. The leasing office says the backup authorization disappeared. I walked slowly into the kitchen and poured myself coffee before answering. Yes. I removed it. Silence. Real silence this time. Then Melissa laughed nervously like she thought she misunderstood me. Wait. What? I removed the automatic payment access from my checking account. Her breathing changed immediately. I could almost picture the expression on her face. Why would you do that without warning us? Without warning us. I nearly smiled hearing the irony. You mean the way I found out about your wedding without warning? Another silence hit the line. Longer this time. Then Melissa spoke carefully, her tone suddenly softer. This is not the same thing. No, I replied quietly. It really is. I heard muffled voices in the background before Daniel suddenly took the phone. Mom, what are you doing? His voice carried that frustrated tone children use when they think a parent is behaving irrationally. I am handling my finances responsibly, I answered. You cannot just pull support without talking to us first. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table while sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. Interesting, I said calmly. I did not realize family decisions required discussion now. Mom, please stop doing this, Daniel sighed. Doing what? Punishing us because of the wedding. There it was at last. The wedding. Finally acknowledged because consequences had arrived. Daniel, I said quietly, do you know what hurt most? He stayed silent. It was not even being excluded. It was realizing your wife truly believed I would still happily fund your lifestyle afterward. I heard him exhale heavily. Melissa already said she feels bad about how things came across. Came across. Such careful wording. As though the problem was my interpretation instead of their behavior. Did she feel bad before the rent problem happened? Silence again. That answer told me everything. Daniel's voice lowered slightly. Look, things are tight right now. Tight. Yet somehow there had been money for vineyards, designer stores, luxury dinners, and professional wedding photography. Then perhaps married life will require some adjustments, I replied calmly. He sounded genuinely shocked by my tone. Mom, you know we cannot cover all this immediately. I looked around my modest kitchen at the old clock ticking above the stove. And yet you believed I should cover it forever. Another long pause followed. Then came the sentence that changed everything permanently between us. Honestly, Mom, Daniel muttered bitterly, you offered to help. Nobody forced you. I closed my eyes slowly. There it was. The full truth finally spoken out loud. Years of sacrifice reduced to technicality. Nobody forced you. Not gratitude. Not love. Just entitlement dressed as logic. When I opened my eyes again, my voice sounded calmer than I felt. You are right, Daniel. Nobody forced me. I helped because I loved you. He softened slightly hearing that. Then why are you stopping now? I stared out the kitchen window at the quiet neighborhood street where leaves moved gently in the afternoon breeze. Because I finally realized love and access are not the same thing. He did not answer immediately. Somewhere in the background, I heard Melissa whispering angrily. Then Daniel lowered his voice further. The landlord says rent is already overdue. Overdue. That word hung in the air between us. For years, overdue notices never reached them because I intercepted every consequence before it arrived. Late fees. Utility threats. Missed payments. Every uncomfortable reality disappeared quietly into my checking account before they ever had to feel it. I am sure you two will figure something out, I said softly. Mom, please. His voice cracked slightly for the first time. We just started our marriage. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Yes, I replied. You did. Silence filled the line again. Then suddenly Melissa grabbed the phone back. Her tone was colder now, stripped of fake politeness completely. So this is revenge. I almost laughed at how quickly kindness disappeared when financial support ended. No, I answered calmly. This is a boundary. You are seriously going to risk us losing our apartment over hurt feelings? Hurt feelings. That phrase settled something deep inside me permanently. To her, years of sacrifice meant nothing. Public humiliation meant nothing. Emotional exclusion meant nothing. Everything I endured had been reduced to hurt feelings. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. Melissa, when I asked about my son's wedding, you told me it was only for special people. She went silent immediately. I continued softly, so I assumed financial support should probably follow the same rule. Dead silence. Complete silence. For several seconds, nobody spoke at all. I could hear faint breathing on the other end of the call, but neither of them seemed able to respond. Then finally Melissa whispered, "You cannot be serious." I looked down at my worn kitchen table where I had once helped Daniel color pictures as a little boy while macaroni boiled on the stove nearby. I remembered every sacrifice. Every overtime shift. Every ignored insult. Every lonely holiday spent trying to hold on to a relationship already slipping away. And strangely, I no longer felt angry. Just awake. I have never been more serious in my life, I said quietly. Then I ended the call. A few minutes later, my phone exploded with messages. Daniel calling repeatedly. Melissa texting paragraphs about misunderstanding and stress and financial pressure. But for the first time in years, I did not rush to solve their panic. I simply placed my phone face down on the table and sat quietly in the afternoon sunlight while an unfamiliar feeling slowly settled into my chest. Peace. Not because I enjoyed their suffering. I did not. They were still my family. But because, for the first time in years, I had finally chosen my own dignity over their convenience. The next week felt like watching a carefully constructed illusion slowly crack apart in real time. For years, Daniel and Melissa moved through life believing someone else would quietly absorb every consequence before it reached them. Now, for the first time, bills remained unpaid long enough for reality to finally knock on their door. And reality, unlike me, was not emotional. It did not care about excuses, manipulation, or guilt. It simply demanded payment. 3 days after our phone call, Daniel showed up at my house unexpectedly around 8 in the evening. I was sitting in the living room folding blankets while an old movie played softly in the background when headlights swept across my front window. A moment later, someone knocked hard on the door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Daniel stood on the porch looking exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and his usually neat hair looked rushed and uneven like he had been running his hands through it all day. For a second, seeing him there stirred the old instinct in me. The instinct to comfort him immediately. To ask what was wrong. To fix everything. But then I remembered standing outside his apartment holding homemade lasagna while his wife treated me like an inconvenience. I remembered finding out about his wedding online. I remembered hearing, "Nobody forced you." So instead of rushing to rescue him emotionally, I simply stepped aside quietly and let him enter. Daniel walked slowly into the house and looked around awkwardly, almost like a stranger visiting for the first time. "You changed the curtains," he muttered absently. I glanced toward the kitchen windows. 3 months ago. He nodded without really listening. His attention was somewhere else entirely. Stress radiated off him. Finally he sat heavily at the dining table and rubbed his face with both hands. "Things are bad," he admitted quietly. I stayed standing near the counter. "How bad?" He exhaled slowly before answering. "The landlord added late fees. Melissa's credit cards are almost maxed out. The utility company suspended internet service yesterday morning. Funny how quickly luxuries disappear once the safety net vanishes." Daniel looked up at me with tired eyes. "I did not realize how much you were covering." That sentence almost broke my heart because buried inside. It was the clearest truth he had spoken in years. He truly had not realized. Not because the support was hidden, but because it had become normal to him. Like electricity. Something expected to exist quietly in the background forever. I know, I answered softly. He swallowed hard. Melissa has been freaking out. I said nothing. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Can we just figure this out together? Together. Interesting word. Suddenly we were together now that consequences arrived. What exactly are you asking me for? I asked calmly. He hesitated before speaking. Just temporary help until we stabilize again. Temporary. The same word from 3 years earlier. I walked slowly to the refrigerator and poured myself a glass of water before replying. Daniel, do you know how many times I heard the word temporary? He lowered his eyes immediately. I know. No, I said gently. I do not think you do. The room fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and distant traffic outside. Then Daniel looked at me again with frustration slowly replacing embarrassment. So that is it? He asked bitterly. You are just cutting us off completely? I stared at my son for a long moment before answering. Do you know what is strange? He frowned slightly. For weeks after your wedding, I cried every day wondering how my own child could erase me from such an important moment. But now suddenly you are the one showing up at my door. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Because we both understood exactly what I meant. His visits had returned the moment money disappeared. Daniel leaned back heavily in the chair looking older than his 30 years. Melissa thinks you hate her. I almost laughed softly at that. Hate. Such a dramatic word from people who dismissed my pain as hurt feelings. I do not hate your wife, I answered honestly. But I finally see her clearly. He looked uncomfortable hearing that. She just thinks differently than you. No, I replied quietly. She values differently than me. Another silence settled between us. Then Daniel finally whispered something I never expected to hear. She is angry that we look broke now. There it was. Not fear of losing their apartment. Not shame for how they treated me. Image. Appearances. Melissa cared about how their lives looked from the outside. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Again. Her friends keep asking why we canceled plans and stopped going out. I remembered all those glamorous online posts. Expensive cocktails. Weekend trips. Designer shopping bags carefully positioned in photographs. A lifestyle built partly from my sacrifices while pretending I barely existed. And what do you tell them? I asked. Daniel gave a hollow little laugh. Nothing good. Then, for the first time since arriving, he looked genuinely ashamed. Mom, did you really find out about the wedding online? That question stunned me because it meant he had never even forced himself to imagine my perspective until now. Yes, I answered quietly. From Facebook. Daniel closed his eyes slowly. Melissa said she thought you already knew. I stared at him in disbelief. Daniel, I called both of you crying. He looked sick hearing it spoken out loud. I know. And you still went on your honeymoon pretending everything was normal. He said nothing. Because there was no defense for it. The truth had finally cornered him in a way my tears never could. After a long silence, Daniel spoke again in a smaller voice. I think I messed up. I looked at my son sitting there exhausted and ashamed, and suddenly I saw flashes of the little boy he used to be. The child who hugged me after basketball games. The teenager who once promised he would always take care of me someday. Somewhere between adulthood, pride, and Melissa's influence, that boy had slowly disappeared beneath entitlement and convenience. But for the first time in years, cracks were finally appearing in the fantasy life they built together. You did not just mess up, I said softly. You got comfortable treating love like an unlimited resource. Daniel stared at the table without speaking. Then his phone buzzed loudly beside him. Melissa. He looked at the screen but did not answer immediately. She keeps blaming me, he admitted quietly. For what? For depending on you too much. The irony nearly took my breath away. The woman who spent years benefiting from my support was now angry that the support existed at all because without it, their marriage suddenly looked unstable. Daniel finally answered the call and immediately Melissa's voice exploded loudly enough for me to hear parts of it from across the table. Did she agree to help? What did she say? We cannot keep living like this. Daniel rubbed his eyes tiredly while listening. Then he said quietly, I will talk to you later. The moment he hung up, the house became silent again. I looked at my son sitting there trapped between financial reality and the woman he married. For years, I feared losing him if I stopped sacrificing myself. But now I understood something important. I had already lost him long ago. The only difference was that now he was finally starting to realize what he lost too. After Daniel left that night, the house felt unusually still. Not lonely. Just still. I stood at the kitchen sink washing 2 untouched coffee mugs while thinking about the expression on my son's face when he admitted things were falling apart. For years I imagined this moment differently. I thought if Daniel ever truly realized how much he hurt me, there would be anger, tears, dramatic apologies. Instead, there was only exhaustion. Quiet exhaustion from a man finally forced to live without someone cushioning every mistake beneath him. I dried the mugs carefully and placed them back in the cabinet before turning off the kitchen light. Then I walked slowly through my house noticing details I had ignored for years. The old hardwood floors. The framed school photos lining the hallway. The faded scratch marks near the pantry door from when Daniel used to race toy trucks through the kitchen as a little boy. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of a life built around motherhood. And somewhere along the way, I had forgotten there was supposed to be a person underneath that role too. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and sat on the front porch with coffee while sunlight slowly warmed the neighborhood. A few houses down, a young mother helped her little boy onto the school bus. He hugged her tightly before climbing aboard. Watching them almost made me cry because suddenly I remembered how temporary motherhood really is. One day they need you for everything. Then slowly, almost without noticing, they stop needing you at all. The healthy children learn gratitude during that transition. The selfish ones learn entitlement. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. Daniel. This time the message was different. Can we talk later? Not about money. I stared at those words for a long moment. Not about money. Maybe that should not have felt remarkable, but it did. For the first time in weeks, my son wanted a conversation that did not involve bills or payments or financial emergencies. I replied simply, okay. That evening, Daniel came over again. He looked even more exhausted than before. His shoulders sagged heavily beneath his jacket, and there was something fragile about him now that had not existed a month earlier. Like reality had finally stripped away the confidence he used to wear so easily. I made tea while he sat quietly at the dining table. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. Then finally Daniel looked around the house slowly and said, I forgot how peaceful it feels here. I almost smiled sadly hearing that because peace used to bore him. Peace was not glamorous enough for the life Melissa wanted to build. How are things? I asked carefully. Daniel rubbed his hands together before answering. Bad. He gave a tired little laugh without humor. Worse than bad, actually. I sat across from him quietly while he continued. Melissa and I have been fighting nonstop. I said nothing. She blames me for depending on you too much. I blame her for spending money we never really had. He looked embarrassed admitting it. We barely even talk normally anymore. I stirred my tea slowly. Marriage becomes very stressful when the image matters more than the foundation. Daniel nodded weakly like he already knew that now. Then he looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Mom, were we really that awful to you? The question caught me off guard because it sounded genuine. Not defensive. Not manipulative. Just painfully honest. I took a slow breath before answering. You stopped seeing me as a person. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. I did not mean for that to happen. I know, I said softly. That is what makes it sad. Silence settled between us again. Then Daniel whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. Melissa said inviting you to the wedding would make her uncomfortable. I felt my chest tighten slightly, but strangely, the pain felt distant now. Like touching an old bruise instead of a fresh wound. And you agreed, I replied calmly. He swallowed hard. I told myself it was easier not to argue. Easier. That word again. So many terrible choices in life hide behind convenience. Daniel stared down at his hands while shame slowly spread across his face. When Dad left, you never made me feel abandoned, he said suddenly. Even when things were terrible. My throat tightened unexpectedly hearing him bring up those years. I tried my best. He nodded slowly. And somehow I still ended up making you feel exactly like that. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Daniel's eyes suddenly filled with tears. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears from someone finally confronting himself honestly. I do not think I became the kind of man you raised, he admitted. That sentence broke something open inside me. Because underneath all the anger and disappointment, he was still my child. A flawed adult now, yes. But still the little boy whose nightmares I once soothed at 2 a.m. Still the teenager who hugged me after basketball games. Still the son I loved enough to destroy myself financially trying to protect him from struggle. I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over his. Daniel, I said quietly, loving someone does not mean removing every consequence from their life. He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. I think I understand that now. Do you? He nodded slowly. I depended on you so much that I stopped respecting what the help actually cost you. The room became quiet again except for the ticking wall clock above the stove. Then Daniel looked up at me carefully. I saw the transfer records, he admitted. $90,000. Hearing the number spoken aloud still shocked me somehow. He shook his head slowly. I do not even know how to process that. I looked down into my tea. Neither did I. Daniel leaned back heavily in the chair. Melissa still thinks you overreacted. I was surprised by how little that statement affected me now. Weeks earlier, it would have devastated me. But clarity changes pain. That is her choice, I replied softly. What about you? He stared at the table for several long seconds before answering. I think I became weak. The honesty in his voice startled me. I let Melissa decide what family meant because it was easier than standing up for you. He looked at me again with genuine regret. And the worst part is, I think deep down I knew it was wrong the whole time. Tears burned behind my eyes, but this time they were different. Not humiliation. Grief. Grief for the years we lost to avoidance, entitlement, and silence. Daniel suddenly laughed weakly through his tears. Do you know something pathetic? I shook my head slightly. When the internet got shut off, Melissa panicked more than when we fought about the wedding. I almost smiled sadly. That tells you everything you need to know. He nodded tiredly. I think we built our whole relationship around appearances. Then after another long silence, he whispered, and you were the one secretly holding everything together. I looked around the kitchen at the small modest home where I had spent decades sacrificing quietly while other people built lives on top of my stability. For so long I thought love meant giving until nothing remained. But sitting there across from my son, I finally understood something important. Real love is not endless rescue. Real love requires truth. And sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is stop saving people long enough for them to finally see themselves clearly. After Daniel left that night, the house felt unusually still. Not lonely. Just still. I stood at the kitchen sink washing 2 untouched coffee mugs while thinking about the expression on my son's face when he admitted things were falling apart. For years I imagined this moment differently. I thought if Daniel ever truly realized how much he hurt me, there would be anger, tears, dramatic apologies. Instead, there was only exhaustion. Quiet exhaustion from a man finally forced to live without someone cushioning every mistake beneath him. I dried the mugs carefully and placed them back in the cabinet before turning off the kitchen light. Then I walked slowly through my house, noticing details I had ignored for years. The old hardwood floors. The framed school photos lining the hallway. The faded scratch marks near the pantry door from when Daniel used to race toy trucks through the kitchen as a little boy. Everywhere I looked, there were pieces of a life built around motherhood. And somewhere along the way, I had forgotten there was supposed to be a person underneath that role too. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual and sat on the front porch with coffee while sunlight slowly warmed the neighborhood. A few houses down, a young mother helped her little boy onto the school bus. He hugged her tightly before climbing aboard. Watching them almost made me cry because suddenly I remembered how temporary motherhood really is. One day they need you for everything. Then slowly, almost without noticing, they stop needing you at all. The healthy children learn gratitude during that transition. The selfish ones learn entitlement. Around noon, my phone buzzed again. Daniel. This time the message was different. Can we talk later? Not about money. I stared at those words for a long moment. Not about money. Maybe that should not have felt remarkable, but it did. For the first time in weeks, my son wanted a conversation that did not involve bills or payments or financial emergencies. I replied simply, okay. That evening, Daniel came over again. He looked even more exhausted than before. His shoulders sagged heavily beneath his jacket, and there was something fragile about him now that had not existed a month earlier. Like reality had finally stripped away the confidence he used to wear so easily. I made tea while he sat quietly at the dining table. Neither of us spoke for a few minutes. Then finally Daniel looked around the house slowly and said, I forgot how peaceful it feels here. I almost smiled sadly hearing that because peace used to bore him. Peace was not glamorous enough for the life Melissa wanted to build. How are things? I asked carefully. Daniel rubbed his hands together before answering. Bad. He gave a tired little laugh without humor. Worse than bad, actually. I sat across from him quietly while he continued. Melissa and I have been fighting nonstop. I said nothing. She blames me for depending on you too much. I blame her for spending money we never really had. He looked embarrassed admitting it. We barely even talk normally anymore. I stirred my tea slowly. Marriage becomes very stressful when the image matters more than the foundation. Daniel nodded weakly like he already knew that now. Then he looked directly at me for the first time all evening. Mom, were we really that awful to you? The question caught me off guard because it sounded genuine. Not defensive. Not manipulative. Just painfully honest. I took a slow breath before answering. You stopped seeing me as a person. Daniel lowered his eyes immediately. I did not mean for that to happen. I know, I said softly. That is what makes it sad. Silence settled between us again. Then Daniel whispered something so quietly I almost missed it. Melissa said inviting you to the wedding would make her uncomfortable. I felt my chest tighten slightly, but strangely, the pain felt distant now. Like touching an old bruise instead of a fresh wound. And you agreed, I replied calmly. He swallowed hard. I told myself it was easier not to argue. Easier. That word again. So many terrible choices in life hide behind convenience. Daniel stared down at his hands while shame slowly spread across his face. When Dad left, you never made me feel abandoned, he said suddenly. Even when things were terrible. My throat tightened unexpectedly hearing him bring up those years. I tried my best. He nodded slowly. And somehow I still ended up making you feel exactly like that. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Daniel's eyes suddenly filled with tears. Not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears from someone finally confronting himself honestly. I do not think I became the kind of man you raised, he admitted. That sentence broke something open inside me. Because underneath all the anger and disappointment, he was still my child. A flawed adult now, yes. But still the little boy whose nightmares I once soothed at 2 a.m. Still the teenager who hugged me after basketball games. Still the son I loved enough to destroy myself financially trying to protect him from struggle. I reached across the table and rested my hand gently over his. Daniel, I said quietly, loving someone does not mean removing every consequence from their life. He wiped his eyes quickly, embarrassed. I think I understand that now. Do you? He nodded slowly. I depended on you so much that I stopped respecting what the help actually cost you. The room became quiet again except for the ticking wall clock above the stove. Then Daniel looked up at me carefully. I saw the transfer records, he admitted. $90,000. Hearing the number spoken aloud still shocked me somehow. He shook his head slowly. I do not even know how to process that. I looked down into my tea. Neither did I. Daniel leaned back heavily in the chair. Melissa still thinks you overreacted. I was surprised by how little that statement affected me now. Weeks earlier, it would have devastated me. But clarity changes pain. That is her choice, I replied softly. What about you? He stared at the table for several long seconds before answering. I think I became weak. The honesty in his voice startled me. I let Melissa decide what family meant because it was easier than standing up for you. He looked at me again with genuine regret. And the worst part is, I think deep down I knew it was wrong the whole time. Tears burned behind my eyes, but this time they were different. Not humiliation. Grief. Grief for the years we lost to avoidance, entitlement, and silence. Daniel suddenly laughed weakly through his tears. Do you know something pathetic? I shook my head slightly. When the internet got shut off, Melissa panicked more than when we fought about the wedding. I almost smiled sadly. That tells you everything you need to know. He nodded tiredly. I think we built our whole relationship around appearances. Then after another long silence, he whispered, and you were the one secretly holding everything together. I looked around the kitchen at the small modest home where I had spent decades sacrificing quietly while other people built lives on top of my stability. For so long I thought love meant giving until nothing remained. But sitting there across from my son, I finally understood something important. Real love is not endless rescue. Real love requires truth. And sometimes the kindest thing a mother can do is stop saving people long enough for them to finally see themselves clearly. Over the next month, life settled into a rhythm that felt unfamiliar but honest. For the first time in years, my paycheck stayed in my own account long enough for me to breathe without anxiety. I fixed the leak in my laundry room ceiling that I had ignored for almost 2 years because there was never enough money. I replaced the worn cushions on my couch. I even bought myself a new winter coat after standing in department stores for years telling myself I should wait another season. Every small purchase felt strangely emotional because I realized how long I had treated my own needs as less important than maintaining someone else's lifestyle. Daniel and I still spoke occasionally, but the conversations were different now. Slower. More careful. There were long silences where both of us seemed to understand that rebuilding trust takes far longer than destroying it. Melissa, however, disappeared almost completely. She stopped posting glamorous photos online. Her social media accounts became quiet after weeks of non-stop luxury updates. Daniel eventually admitted they were fighting constantly about money, stress, and different expectations for marriage. I did not ask for details because honestly, I no longer wanted to live inside their chaos. For years, their problems became my responsibility before they ever had a chance to become theirs. I was finally learning how peaceful life feels when adults handle their own consequences. One Sunday afternoon, Daniel came over carrying a cardboard box. He looked thinner than before, more tired, but also strangely more grounded. Like someone waking up after years of pretending. I found these while cleaning the apartment, he said quietly. Inside the box were old family photographs, school drawings, birthday cards, and handmade crafts from his childhood. I picked up a faded construction paper card that read "Best Mom Ever" in crooked blue marker from when he was 7 years old. My throat tightened instantly. Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table while I slowly looked through the memories of a life that once felt so simple. I do not think I understood how much you gave up for me, he admitted softly. I kept staring at the old cards in my hands. Parents are supposed to sacrifice for their children. Yes, he said quietly. But children are supposed to appreciate it. That sentence hung heavily in the room between us. I looked up at my son and saw genuine regret sitting behind his eyes now. Not panic. Not manipulation. Just regret. Melissa still thinks I should apologize to you, he admitted after a moment. I almost smiled sadly. For what? For embarrassing her about the wedding. There it was again. Image. Reputation. Appearances. Even after everything, she still saw herself as the victim of discomfort rather than the cause of pain. Daniel shook his head tiredly. I do not think she understands what really happened. I placed the old birthday card carefully back into the box. Some people only understand loss when it finally costs them something personally. He nodded slowly because now he understood that too. After a while, Daniel looked around the kitchen quietly before asking, "Can I tell you something honestly?" Of course. He swallowed hard. When you stopped helping financially, I hated you for a few days. I appreciated the honesty more than he probably realized. Why? I asked gently. Because suddenly I had to see how unstable my life actually was. He rubbed his hands together awkwardly. And it was easier to blame you than admit I built adulthood on support I never earned myself. Hearing him say that felt strangely healing because it was the first time in years my son spoke to me like an honest man instead of a defensive child. But then something changed, he continued quietly. What? He looked directly at me. I realized you never abandoned me. You just stopped protecting me from consequences. Tears burned behind my eyes instantly. For so long, all I wanted was for him to truly understand. Not the money itself. The emotional weight behind it. The years of silent sacrifice. The loneliness. The humiliation. The way it felt to love someone so much that you slowly disappeared trying to support them. I wish you understood sooner, I whispered. Daniel's face tightened with pain. Me too. We sat there quietly for a long time after that. Outside, late afternoon sunlight stretched softly across the neighborhood while wind moved through the trees near the porch. Eventually Daniel stood slowly and looked down at the old memory box sitting between us. I think I forgot who you were outside of what you provided, he admitted. I looked at my son carefully then. Really looked at him. The exhaustion in his face. The shame. The maturity finally beginning to form underneath years of entitlement. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in a very long time, I could see traces of the compassionate little boy I raised. Daniel, I said softly, I do not need you to spend the rest of your life apologizing to me. He looked surprised hearing that. Then what do you want? I thought about that question carefully before answering. I want you to become the kind of man who never treats love like a transaction again. His eyes filled slightly with emotion before he nodded. I will try. And strangely, for the first time in years, I believed him. A week later, I heard from one of Daniel's cousins that Melissa had been complaining to extended family about how I destroyed the newlywed phase of their marriage by cutting financial support unexpectedly. Apparently some people agreed with her. They said family should help family. Funny how. Nobody says that when the helping flows only one direction for years. But their opinions no longer controlled me the way they once would have. Because peace changes a person. Once you finally experience what life feels like without constantly sacrificing yourself for people who take you for granted, it becomes impossible to return to emotional slavery disguised as love. That evening, I sat alone on my front porch wrapped in my new winter coat while autumn air moved gently through the neighborhood. Across the street, porch lights flickered on one by one as families settled into their homes for the night. I thought about the wedding photos again for the first time in weeks. The vineyard. The smiling guests. The caption about special people. Oddly enough, the memory no longer made me cry. Because now I understood something they did not understand that day. Being excluded from a wedding did not humiliate me nearly as much as spending years allowing myself to be valued only for what I could provide. And the moment I finally stopped funding their comfort, the truth revealed itself completely. My son had not forgotten to invite me to his wedding because I was unimportant. He forgot because he believed I would always stay no matter how little respect I received in return. But some lessons only arrive after consequences do. I looked out at the quiet street while cold evening air brushed softly against my face, and for the first time in many years, I felt something deeper than relief. I felt free. Then quietly, almost to myself, I whispered the one truth it took me far too long to learn. You did not forget to invite me to your wedding. You forgot who paid for your life.